morning. Oh, we can do better than that, right? Good morning. Did you all have a good time yesterday? Opening, yes, opening, absolutely. I'm Chantel Johnson, so excited to have you here in the Vineyard Lounge. Martha's Vineyard African American Film Festival, year 23. We're so excited. I'm excited to introduce you to our next session, actually our first session in the lounge. I would like to introduce our moderator, Donnell Baldwin, to the stage. Yes, yes.
Good morning, good morning. You guys can hear me. Everyone looks so great and smiling. It's bright and early. Well, not that early, but it is bright. So I'd like to introduce our special guest here, Dr. LeCharles Ward. Dr. LeCharles Ward is a museum curator and director of the Earl W. and Amanda Stafford Center for African American Media Arts at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Now, how incredible is that? So let's give him a round of applause. Dr. LeCharles is gonna give us some information and show us a little bit about this way of life, our way of life, Black Dandism, as it relates to photography, fashion, and film.
Great. Can you all hear me just fine?
Yes.
Perfect. Thanks for being here. I would say, I'm from Chicago, and we would always say, thanks for braving the wind, but out here it's not that. Thanks for the introduction. And I'm so happy to be here. It took an act of God to get me here from only DC. Okay. So first I would like to thank Stephanie and Floyd for the invitation to be here this year. The museum has come the last few years, and it's always a great time to be in this space with folks who are committed to African American life and culture and history. And so thanks. Also thanks to the entire team of folks here that you see who all have made this possible for us to be here and to enjoy this conversation. As Donnell has mentioned, I am the Chief Curator of Photography and Film at the Smithsonian's African American History and Culture Museum. I've been there for about 2 years, so I'm relatively new as a curator there. And I oversee the Department of Photography and Film, which is to say that I oversee all research projects and acquisitions and curatorial work related to photography and film at the museum. To give you a little bit about kind of how this will flow, I have a background as a professor, and so I'm going to talk a little bit, give some information, but also share some really amazing photographs that I think will illustrate the theme of today. And so, next slide, please. Great. So, bear with me. There's some information that I hope will be helpful for folks who know the term dandyism. You don't feel like you need to read all of the information on the screen, but this is just as a way to share that information. So, a brief history of dandyism. Black dandism is not a new thing, even though we have experienced the Met Gala, and I think the Met Gala really brought that back to the fore. But there is an incredible book by Monica Miller, who is also the curator of that exhibition, where she talked about the history of Black dandyism. And in that, she reveals that dandyism was imposed on black men in the 18th century England, and think through the Atlantic slave trade, as well as how over time black people began to create their own sense of style in response to the ways in which that was imposed on them. So what's important to know is that this was originally a kind of a concept to understand black fashion, and what the Met Gala did was really move that and created kind of an exhibition to narrate that history around identity. So iterations of black style, Millerite attempts to escape stereotypes and essentialism as it relates to African Americans. And so, for example, you can think of the phrase, oh, well, that person pulled that fit off, right? Or they they ate that fit, right? All these terms really think about how we understand fashion. And so Black dandyism then also functioned as a type of fashionable weapon to challenge impositions and containment of identity. But importantly, it doesn't just lead to an idea of some sort of liberation, right? But that it was always an ebb and flow. So she write that, and I'm doing this to situate Monica Miller as a leading Black woman scholar of this field. There's a way in which she has been erased from that history, and so I'm going through this intentionally to situate her as an important figure within this field, right? But also because when we talk about Black Dandism, oftentimes, importantly, but also at the limitation, women gets rid out of the questions around fashion, even for Black Dandism. And so Monica Miller really does an important work to highlight the kind of relationship between fashion and African Americans, not just as it relates to Black men, but also Black women. But also she argues the ways in which white scholars have written Black people out of fashion, and that continues to happen. And so this is why I take the time to go through this important history. Next slide, please. So here you have some lovely photographs by Tyler Mitchell. These were featured in the exhibition, Superfine. He is a young photographer from Atlanta who really attempts to reimagine style of the period, right, with modern subjects, right? And so these are extraordinary images. You can see even the image on the left could remind you of something that was taken in like the 60s or 70s. And so it speaks to the incredible talent of photographers that we have now reaching back to history in order to narrate that visual story for us now. Next slide, please. So Superfine, as is curated by Miller, draws on her scholarly expertise to curate an exhibition on Black fashion and style. On the one hand, it's important to recognize the work done by Miller to curate an important exhibition, but it's equally important to critique how the gala, that is, as a fundraising event, directly and indirectly extracted some of the rebellious roots at the heart of the Black dandy for hyperconsumption. What I mean by that is that on the one hand, it is okay to applaud and enjoy the fits, right, that you saw, but it's also, we have to question who was in that room, but also the consumption connected to fashion and how you can disentangle those from one another, right? I think when I used to teach, I was like, you can have a critique and appreciate at the same time, right? And I think it's important to know that Monica Miller curated the exhibition at the Met. She did not have a big hand in the actual gala, the Met Gala, and that's an important distinction to make, right? And so thinking about how people donned themselves in fashion that was mostly considered to be within African American culture is really important, and not because they're somehow bad people, but just to think about how the ways in which we fashion ourselves gets extracted and hyper-consumed, right? To the point in which we are erased from that kind of history, right? And so who gets tailored, styled, and adorned? And where does one look to see the power of Black style and fashion? Likely to the Black people not attending such events. I mean, when we think about who pull off think of street photography in New York or Atlanta or Chicago, or even across any major city, oftentimes it's the creativity that we see in the outfits that really compel us to look and to linger, right? And that's what's so fascinating. So next slide, please. So in 2018, the museum published a book on Black style, and importantly, the various ways Black people embodied everyday beauty. It narrates via text the images, snippets of day-to-day, capturing the remarkable beauty of living and making do, and what it means to fashion oneself even in the ordinariness of the day. The photographs aren't always remnants of historical moments or the loudness of special occasions, but of the quiet, of the vernacular, the cadence of everyday living. Next slide, please. Everyday beauty is a story of how we see ourselves and how we are seen. It is also about understanding and seeing a whole life, or apprehending the beauty and richness of Black humanity. Despite or in spite of our humanity, Black people continue to show themselves and to fashion themselves. It is also about telling a story for us, about us, right? And I think that's important because oftentimes, and in the next few slides you'll see, is what does it mean to picture ourselves, right, in a way that we imagine ourselves being seen in the culture. Thank you. And so what you're seeing here, and there may be some copies of the books around, is images by different photographers who've kind of documented photographs of African Americans from the early 19th century through the 21st century. This is a small book, but it's a powerful book of just really trying to narrate that story. Next slide, please. We all are familiar with the Ebony and Jet, the Johnson Publishing Collection Archive. The JPC collection is regarded as one of the most significant and substantial collections of Black American culture in the 20th century and features images from the iconic publications of Ebony and Jet, as well as other publications such as 10. If you were around long enough, you may have encountered 10. 10 preceded it. And it's important to know that Ebony was the first one because it was meant to lure advertisers in order for the Johnson family to really front the larger project that they wanted to do, which is to really produce material for and about Black folks. And so then you get Jet and you get subsequent magazines. For decades, Ebony and Jet documented through photographs and text stories of Black celebrity, fashion, leisure, movements for Black life, and most importantly, created a little breathing room for Black people to see themselves and present a richer picture of who they were. And that is because we couldn't turn to Life magazine as a way to do that. And so how do we do that for ourselves? So Ebony, to quote John H. Johnson, was founded to provide positive images for Blacks in a world of negative images and non-images. It was founded to project all dimensions of Black personality in a world saturated with stereotypes. So think back to why I opened with Monica Miller and I talked about the idea of essentialism and stereotypes and ways in which those stereotypes fixed certain kinds of images of who we were and who we should be. And when we pushed against those, it was always considered to be an exception to the rule as opposed to constitutive or part of who we were from the very beginning, right? And so that's really important. Key to Ebony's success was a dizzying roster of photographers and photojournalists who documented and communicated cultural symbols in variosphere images. Through a unique, and let's hold on the Spike Lee one for a little bit. Through a unique visual language and aesthetic, the photographers chronicled Black trials and tragedies in an attempt to look beyond the image's surface and define its truth and humanity. It pictured Black people as human beings, as complex and diverse folks, right? And I always give this example of from someone from the Midwest, I didn't grow up coming, for example, to the Vineyards. My family grew up going to Idlewild or to New Buffalo or to other parts of Upper Peninsula, Michigan, right? And so thinking even about how we tell regional stories about Black folks and those different kinds of experiences were all shaped, and that was something that the Johnson family really tried to capture. Also what it meant to live in the Black South, right? What it meant to be tenement farmers, but also what it meant to be middle-class Black families in rural South, where we were only getting pictures of the kind of devastation, not to dismiss the devastation, but that there are also ways of living that were happening also there. So we can even think about, we have Atlanta, but thinking also around Savannah, Georgia, and other parts of the South, New Orleans, Texas, Houston, all of those places. The Johnson Publishing Collection Company Archive was acquired in 2019 by a not-for-profit consortium that consisted of the Smithsonian Institution, the J. Paul Getty Trust, the Ford Foundation, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, and the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. In 2022, the consortium announced the official transfer of ownership of the archive to the National Museum of African American History and Culture and the Getty Research Institute as co-stewards. What that means is that that collection will now be accessible to the public. It will physically be housed in Washington, D.C. in a new research center dedicated to the Johnson Publishing Archive. Just to give you, next slide, please. I think, see, you can hold here. Just to give you an example of what's in that collection, there are 3.3 million photo negatives and slides, 983,000 photographic prints, 166,000 contact sheets, 9,000 audio and video recordings. That totals roughly 4.3 million objects, all of which are being digitized over the next few years, that will be accessible to the public to search. but they would also be physically housed for creators, filmmakers, scholars, photographers, etc. once it's up and going, to visit that collection and to study that collection. That is a monumental thing, to make something like that public and not private. It represents the most comprehensive collection documenting Black life. Though it will be several years before you all will actually officially have access to that. I know I will get questions about that in the end, because every time I talk about it, it's always, when can we get it? It's, as I just given you the numbers, it's a really large collection to process. And so we are processing, digitizing, and conserving this immense collection. And before the physical space open, I have some photographs from the collection that I will share that are connected to Black fashion and dandyism, and the theme of today. It captured a wide array of celebrities, writers, thinkers, musicians, and political figures. And so you can move through slides 14 through 21 slowly, if that's okay. So we have some images of James Brown, and I've highlighted ones where we can see the kind of care that is taken in fashioning Black folks. We have Maya Angelou here. We have Cap Calloway. And all of these photographs are related. We have Betty Shabazz to really thinking about how, over a period of time, Black people truly fashioned themselves. These are images that some folks may have never seen before because they've been in the Johnson Publishing collection. What's important is that they didn't publish every image that they took, right? That was not what they did. And so we have Art Blakey, Angela Davis. We have Teddy Pendergrass and James Brown. Let's hold on here. My scholar is going to come out, okay? And there'll be some other images. What's really great about the Johnson collection is that you saw what we call process notes on the actual images. I mean, they were a publishing first and foremost company. And so you can kind of see the writings here. These were, of course, indicating who they were, but some of the red markings was because as they were thinking about how this would go to print, right, they wanted to know what part of the image to capture. We have Photoshop now, but back then they didn't. And so they had to write on the image, right, to figure out what's going to be the foreground, what's going to be the background, what's going to be the central focus of the image. If there are people that they didn't want to have in that photograph, how did they take them out? They oftentimes use a kind of an X-Acto knife and cut off that face, or they did some other work to do that. That was how they edited a photo. And so when you would see it appear in the actual magazine, there was some work that happened, right? And so on the other one, you have Cicely Tyson and Miles Davis here. You can advance slides. You have Nina Simone, one performing, and Nina Simone also with her jewelry collection. And this is a really great slide, because the Johnson, they didn't just focus on celebrities, right, or the big names that we knew. The archive was filled with photographs of everyday people and their acts of living. And so the next set of photographs that you're going to see are some of just people in different cities doing things. Some of these photographs were taken by Monetta Sleet, which is a really important African-American photographer. So this is a photograph of the subjects are unknown, but they were preparing to go out for the evening, and you can kind of see them both talking and getting dressed here. You can advance the slide. On the left, this is I forget the year, this is 1956, this is a Kappa Carnival. And so this was in New York City, and this was one of the photographs from the scene. This is a few people playing checkers, I believe in Memphis on Beale Street. Leisure. So here is South Carolina Beach. This is two Black women riding their bikes in Yosemite National Park. And then on the far right, is some Black boaters in Idlewild, Michigan, also enjoying leisure. So what was incredible about the Johnson family is that they wanted to capture everything, right? So they were pushing back against the idea that, like, Black folks don't go hiking, they don't go to national parks. What? right? But that in fact was not the case. And so we had lots of those images that are in that collection where folks are enjoying leisure. And that's really important because so much was still happening at these times. These were all photographs from the 50s and 60s and 70s. I mean, we know what was going on during this period, right? But one of the things that's so extraordinary, of course, about Black people, but extraordinary about what this archive tells, is that even in those moments of profound violence and devastation, there was ways in which we tried to figure out a way to live a little bit, right? To get our minds off of things. And that's an important story that Johnson and that we tell. I mean, it's a part of our story. It's a part of our national story. You can advance the slide. This is my favorite, thinking about Black Dandism. This is at the Hampton Institute in 1955, right? These are Black men in fashion class learning to sew and tailor clothes, right? I mean, it's an incredible photograph that narrates such a complex history of our relationship to fashion, but also our relationship to knowledge production, right? And also the importance of historically Black colleges and universities, right? It's incredible. Next slide, please. This is an amazing Moneta Sleet photograph. And so the Johnson collection, you have it split up where they'll list fashion photographs for the summer, swimwear, the derby, polo, golf, right? And so this is another fantastic photograph of Black women by Moneta Sleet. And one of the things, and just hold on this slide, one of the things that I love about this is that you can see even just the care that's taken to adjust, to hang things on clothes, right? The laughter, the joy that comes out in that photograph is just absolutely remarkable. Next slide. And so now I want to talk about the Ebony Fashion Fair, right? So again, thinking about this theme of fashion and dandyism, again, it's been a part of us since the beginning, right? And that's what's great about Monica Miller's book, is that she says that Black people were always fashion themselves and interested in fashion. It didn't just fall out of the sky, right? It didn't just come. And so this is the Ebony Fashion Fair of 1964. You can kind of feel I've just fell into my element, right? I don't even have the paper anymore. So this is the Fashion Fair of 1964, right? You want to advance slides? And that fashion fair was really important. Here's Richard Roundtree. Go back, yes. So I'm gonna block folks, but there's screens on the other side, okay? So you can kind of see here, right? How what happens in this image first is an attempt to get at this image, right? So what happens is this is a piece of sheet that you can write on. You can kind of see measurements here. What's really important here is this is Black entrepreneurship and technical skills at its finest, right? They're trying to figure out, what are we going to create as the image here, and what will that look like? So what the measurements is how they would produce the image so that it prints out also on the screen. But also, so you can see he's kind of further back on this image, but they brought him forward on the other image, right? And so there's a way in which to do that, they have to do that manually. And so what you find in the archive is a bunch of these kinds of notations, which as a scholar of photography, I live for. I love it. I absolutely love it. Next slide. What's also incredible, and this is something that most people had no idea. When I saw this in the archive, I think I trembled a little bit. They also did fashion shows for the visually impaired. They wanted everyone to experience the feel of fashion. And so folks were there who could see would guide them around. And so you can kind of see, I mean, they're still dressed to the tins, these photographs, right? It's an incredible collection. And this is just one of many. And what you have on the back lets you know that it was printed in ebony in October of '54, right? They were meticulous, right? It lets you know who the photographer was at the time and also who the folks were, right? Why that's important is that because when this collection is actually accessible, the amount of material that both will be written about it and produced from this collection will be vast, right? And so having this information is incredible for anyone. And this is probably one of my favorite pieces of exploring this collection. And just to let you know, about only 1% of that collection has actually been processed. Remember, 1%. The collection is 4.3 million objects. Just let that sit in terms of the scale of that collection. Next slide, please. And so here's some images from the Ebony Fair, which still the Lyndon Johnson Rice still does a lot of the fashion part of Ebony. And so you have some of the traditional printouts that were in the actual Ebony magazine. And how many of you were around to have had the full size Ebony, right? So, okay, so that's an important thing. So for a long period of time, Ebony was a kind of a larger size magazine. Jet was always smaller, but Jet came after Ebony. And so the printing costs, so Ebony, the Johnson family didn't own their own printing press. They contracted that out, right? And so over the period of time, they will then begin to phase out the large scale. And if you got some of the last issues, they will let you know, this is the last full-size issue of this printing. The next one will be smaller size. And so you can now kind of see that this is a print, a kind of an image from that larger Ebony fold. If you still have those, you should keep them. They are amazing. You don't want to let those go, okay? And so just some of America's best dressed women you've never read about, right? Also subtly critiquing, maybe not so subtly, but critiquing like Life magazine and other kinds of magazines that were around at the time. I'm recognizing time, so yeah. But I'm approaching the end. Recognizing that, but also the cosmetic, right? Thinking about how we capture Black women adorning themselves in makeup. And one of the things that's really, really, really important is the photographers for Ebony, for the Johnson family, were overwhelmingly Black. That's important, as well as the technicians, which is important, which is to say that how you light melanin skin is really important, right? How do you capture the complexities of how we look, how our skin reflects from the lens and the camera, how light refracts through the camera is important. And so when you look at those images, right, they were very careful of how do we capture as best as possible skin complexion, right? And that is something that even to this day, I mean, when you think of Kodak Gold, the film Kodak Gold, do you all know the history of that? The history is because the original film actually just whitened every Black person. It was not good at capturing skin. And so Kodak Gold was a way to capture more vividly brown and Black and light skin. Right? And so if you look at the history of the Eastman family and the Kodak Gold film, if you were photographers, some of you may know this, especially if you did analog film photography, right? Not the digital film, and so it's always great. Okay, I can talk about that forever. So let me just pause to find my place. Okay. All right, so we are now at the Black Fashion Collection and Preservation at the museum. So I've talked a little bit about what we have in the collection, what is forthcoming to our collection. I also want to talk about, we are a museum. Our goal is to preserve, first of all, to conserve and then preserve all of these different objects. So for example, for me, some of the photographs that you just saw, my job is to ensure that those photographs live far beyond all of us in this space so that people, generations after us, will have access to that, right? That's the work that I do. That is the work that I committed to, and I live for that every day. I go in knowing that this work will survive beyond me. When I acquire, it's because I know that this work will go beyond me. Part of that work means that we have to conserve and preserve that. Conservation means that we are, go back to the other slide. Conservation means, for here, in 2007, the museum acquired the Black Fashion Museum collection from Louis Alexander Lane, who founded it in Harlem in 1979. The goal was to create a space for Black fashion and to preserve the stories and work of underrepresented Black fashion designers. Again, that is an important thing because they're oftentimes written out of the history of fashion, generally. The collection spans the mid-19th century through the end of the 20th century and contains almost more than 2,000 garments and accessories. We have a dress sewn by Rosa Parks, a dress designed by Zelda Wynn and for Eartha Kitt, gowns designed by pioneering African-American designer Ann Lowe, and many, many others. And we've been working to process, to catalog, and rehouse all of these different objects for the museum. And so you can see here, this is the dress designed by, this is sewn by Rosa Parks. And then over here is a dress from the Civil War period that Black women wore during that period of time, also in our collection. And you can kind of see many of the work that happens here. This is our preservation team. Preservation happens across the museum, whether it's for photography, whether it's for film. For example, I lead a team of time-based media film conservation and preservation, so we've been restoring like early African-American cinema. We recently, with the work with Indiana University, restored Will, a film by Jessie Maples, who is a pioneering Black woman independent filmmaker, and it was the first role that many of the people that we know as actors and actresses got their first role in, and it was filmed with one camera in Brooklyn, New York. It's an incredible film called Will that you should check out. Next slide. And of course, I can't not end on this slide, right? And so I came in and was like, there's a final deck that you need to upload. And I was like, the only difference is that I just added the Ralph Lauren's Oak Bluffs collection. I add this slide also to kind of be able to reflect back on some of the fashion that you just saw in some of the other photographs, particularly even the Tyler Mitchell photo, but also think about the tweed that you just saw of the Moneta Sleet in the last image, right? Just to think about how what we call the visual resonance of these different stylistic choices continue to reverberate through and through and through in terms of how we tell that story. I think that may be it. No. Last slide. Thank you. Thank you. And then if you want to stay connected with us, there's a QR code that's there. As you can see, I love talking about all things Black culture, but I love talking about photography in particular. So I'm here. I think we're going to have a conversation.
Yes, yes.
Perfect.
Oh my gosh, give him a round of applause. That was incredible. I feel like I just took a trip down memory lane and fell in love with fashion all over again, and photography and film through the lens of just, thank you so much. This is remarkable. I have to ask you, because I am a fashion enthusiast, how did you fall in love with photography and film, and as it relates to Black people? How did you fall in love with this?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I fell in love with photography, I would say, probably in middle school. I took an art class, and I hated painting. Although I love painting now, I hated the doing of painting, right? The act of painting. And so I was like, but what other thing can I get into? And then I got into photography, and this is really important. I found photography, and I realized I'm not the greatest photographer, and I also don't want to go to school to be a photographer, but I was interested in like the composition of an image, like what the image did to me, how I felt when I looked at a photograph. And I always tell people that there's a way in which when I encounter a photograph, I always tell people that I live and breathe and see images. That's how I move through the world. And I always tell folks that when I see an image that in some ways compels me to just stay and linger, I'm always wondering what was the intent of the photograph. And so in middle school, like that was my introduction where I realized I had an interest in photography. It wasn't until, I guess I would say, high school that I fell in love with film. What I mean by fell in love with film, I always liked film, but I meant that I went to I'm from Chicago, so I went to film screenings throughout high school all the time. I loved it. I could sit through a film and be very happy. I like to go even to this day, I prefer going to the movies by myself. I usually go when the theater's ideally empty, right? So that I can just be with the film. But it wasn't until high school, and it was the film that I watched it was called In the Mood for Love, and it's Warren K. Lee. It was a Taiwanese filmmaker. It is one of the most stunning films ever, and it's important because if you hear Barry Jenkins talk about Moonlight, he talks about how that film inspired his visual aesthetic and cinematography. And so that takes me to why I'm doing both of these. So I'm interested in both photography and film because I'm interested in cinematography as the practice. I mean, it's still using of the camera, right? So that's how I fell in love with it. It is why I love it now. It's why I went to school like doing medical stuff and ended up realizing that my passion wasn't that, and my passion was actually the arts, photography, and film. So I actually got into this career relatively late in life, but I always had this going.
Wow.
So like I said, I've only been at the museum for 2 years, and so
wow. Incredible. And we talked way before this, and just trying to connect and talk about our backgrounds and paths and stuff. And my background's in fashion, and I fell in love with fashion primarily the same way, and just I went to art camps and fell in love with painting and all of the different things that have led me up into this fashion background and love for fashion. Now I want to talk a little bit about, you mentioned it in the beginning, about appropriation and how appropriation, particularly as it related to the Met Gala, and the difference between the Met Gala and the exhibition.
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit more about your thoughts on appropriation?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think for events like the Met Gala, and in particular in that particular moment, so the exhibition itself was put on by still part of the organizing committee of the Met Gala. That's why it's complicated. But the goal was to highlight a collection of objects and histories, right? It was to narrate the book. But it's connected to the Fashion Institute and Museum of the Met, who every year, and this is not to knock people who do fundraising events, right? That's part of how we do things, right? So that's not what's happening. I'm at a museum. We also do similar kinds of things, right? But it was the theme of it, and there's a lot of work. I'm building up to the kind of point that I'm going to make. There was a lot of work in terms of the selection of the organizing committee. So we can think of Coleman Domingo. Yeah, right. People that they selected to kind of lead that. But it was also about the people who attended and their lack of understanding of even the history of Black fashion, right? But yet they were very fast to adorn themselves and the idea of Black culture and fashion, right? And that is the part that gets very slippery. Is that on the one hand, there's a desire to appreciate people who want to have a sense of like showing the kind of creativity of Black people and the way in which they fashion themselves. But on the other hand, you have to wonder, and there was lots written about it, also like how people ignorantly just adorn themselves with things that they didn't really consider. To me, that is whether it's directly or indirectly a type of appropriation of Black culture, right? Because at the end of the day, they go and take that all off, and then they probably never really think about it again. That's not the case for maybe some of the other folks. But also the cost of the tickets to go and who were able to go. I mean, the idea is that you have to have a seat bought for you, right? So you had these major fashion houses and stuff buying tickets for people to wear their clothes. And so it's a complicated thing, right? But appropriation manifests in what I call very loud ways and very minor ways. And I think we saw that on display at the Met Gala. And I think one of the things that help I think lessen the blow, and it's also important, I had it on the slide, that it was also one of the most highly viewed galas in the history of the Met Gala, which again, we should ask why. Right? But the thing is, we know why.
Because Black people are purveyors of style,
right?
And race, and class.
Right? We know why, right? Yet, even to this day, the people who appear in these ads of fashion, it's still not us. right?
Yeah.
Right? It's still not us. I mean, so I think that that's part of it. I think the exhibition itself was absolutely fantastic. But I can both, like I said, I can both enjoy that and appreciate that and have kind of a lingering critique.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I mean, and just looking at it, I mean, obviously we're kind of, we did not attend, at least I did not attend, I can't speak for anyone else, but looking on it and seeing, wow, they could have really leaned in a little bit more and really embodied a black dandy.
Yeah.
The Andre Leon Talley's, like that was such a huge miss, but it is such a win for us to have that type of spotlight on Black Dandism.
Exactly.
So it is a little bit nuanced.
Exactly. And and I'm glad you brought up Andre Leon Talley, because there was a red puffer coat that you saw there.
Yes.
That was the coat that was Andre Leon Talley's, which is in our collection as well as some other photographs. So there it is right there.
Right here.
Right? And so there's a way in which they could have leaned in. I mean, people have said, like, they didn't really go in and lean in to really think with Andre Leon Talley here, I mean, who's been really important. But also there is a glossing that happens when you try to produce something at that scale.
Yes.
And by glossing, I mean a kind of a glossing of history and a glossing of the care that is taken to kind of, wear something, to understand where things came from. And there were some really great stories of like people who really consulted and hired, black designers to do their work. And I think those are important stories. But those stories become the exception again, right? Because we know that that's not the majority. And I think leaning in, there was areas where they also could have leaned in to really highlight the impact around gender and sexuality and how that shapes how we think about fashion, right? And so there's a lot of, and the thing is, you can't do everything, but you can recognize the things that you don't do. And what I mean by that is, it's accept, like, we missed the mark on some things.
Yes.
Right?
Well, you just touched on what I was getting ready to go into next, which is women and gender and fluidity. So there are women dandies. Who do you feel like is kind of embodying that women dandy-esque vibe currently?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, I think a lot of people argue that someone like Janelle Monáe.
Yes.
Right? I think, but there are many other folks who I think are what I would say pushing at the seams of what is acceptable, or let me retract that. Pushing at the seams of what society has oftentimes deemed unacceptable. As it relates to gender and sexuality, right? It's also crossing generations, people's perception of politics of respectability, of what is considered respectable attire and not respectable attire, and that push also at the seams of that. But I think someone like Janelle Monáe, but I also will say that there are people, even like Coleman Domingo, who pushes against all types of gender confines. I mean, and I think, and there are also many hip hop figures who's also pushing against what is acceptable masculine attire. And so I think, and let's be very clear, Black Dandism was all about pushing at the seams of gender and sexuality. I mean,
or like a Billy Porter who rides the line between
exactly. And I think that's important because it's also part of people embracing their style and self-fashion themselves in a way that they want to and feel like they need to. And I think that's really critical. And I also want to say one other thing that's really important about Ebony. Ebony also were very intentional in capturing men who dress like women and dress really well, or women who dress like men, right? And I know we have lots of, we may have lots of kind of criticism or pushbacks of how we think about whether or not that's okay or not, but if we think about how we understand the kinds of image that there's a narrative around the Johnson family that they were only allowing certain kinds of images to be produced about black people. But yet, if you look into their collection, what you realize is that they actually were trying to capture the complete variety of how black people express themselves, and that was also across gender and sexuality. I mean, think of people like Cab Calloway. I mean, there's a number of Cab Calloway, James Brown. I mean, there is Prince photos. I mean, who also pushed at the seams, and so we have these figures where we always just say, that's an interesting outfit, right? And we keep it moving, right? Right? That's the way. Bless their heart.
We've all said that.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So true. So I want to switch gears just just a little bit for the sake of time, and I want to ask some of our attendees if they have questions as well. But as you're going through the archives, and I'm like obsessed with all of these different archival excellence, I'd say, what do you think the importance of being seen or seeing yourself depicted in film and photography means for the future?
The scale and value of seeing yourself, right? And even if it's not how you see yourself, but it gives you a space to think about what would it mean to picture someone like me, right? Right? It gives you a kind of license or invitation to like say, you know what, I can do a film that can then highlight my specific kind of experience. It's one of the reasons, actually, and it's one of the reasons why the TV show Forever has a hold on not just young demographics, but also on what it means to be a parent to this generation, right? But also it creates a space for the generation which is represented to be seen, right? And how they navigate that. That itself is a profound thing, because one of the things is that we need to be able to create images for all of the folks in our communities, right? Not just for certain segments. It's also, we can think, well, there are many examples of that. Why I think it's important. It's an important thing to do because, it gives people the room to say, this is something that I'm interested in doing myself. But it's also a way to kind of push back against narratives that they may have read about or seen elsewhere. I think it's important. But I think more importantly than any of those is to give one a language to talk about what it means to have saw something that seems familiar to you, right? Because one of the things that we lack sometimes is the language to talk about that thing that made me feel a certain way. Like, I think about when I watched Nickel Boys, for example, right? There are many things that made me uncomfortable about it, but there were really also things that compelled me to linger, and that is the story that it attempted to tell about the community in Florida, right? We can think of any number of films that do that work. I'm even thinking about Sinners, right? Sinners, when we think about the genre in which Sinners, the horror genre, if you want to say, that is also a genre in which Black folks and creatives are erased from. The assumption is that is not a genre that they can take on, right? And so to see that happen and to see it done, the cinematography alone, I think, just floored me. It is absolutely spectacular, right? But even the dancing, right? Think about that dancing, the way in which it unsettled people because it was like, what's happening here? Like, there's too many, there's so much going on here. But the point of that is that it created a space for, in that moment, which felt long because it was long, for people to see themselves. And that's really, really important. And that is, in my mind, that is a true lasting work of art, right? So when we see some of these photographs, we're just like, oh my God, I know such and such. Even the Ebony book, I would go to my aunt's house and see them on the coffee tables. And I would just, look through them there, right? So even that creates a moment to feel like I've been seen. Right? And it's for me, it is those moments that are created. How we seize those moments are things that are beyond anyone's control, right? But I think it's important to have
the moments,
the archive, the moments.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's give him a round of applause. I'm gonna open up for questions. Are there any questions for Dr. LeCharles? I'm sure there are. Oh, there's one right here.
I love the first question.
Hi. Good morning. By the way, both of you are so impeccably dressed. Touche. I noticed on the exposition that you had a lot of items say 1930s, and I've always enjoyed the fashion that occurred around the turn of the century, right to say the 1940s. Will you also be having in the collection that style, that the era of dandyism reflected?
Yes, and so we have, I'm not the fashion curator. That is Elaine Nichols. Actually, she just retired. But that doesn't, to your question, yes, we have actually representation of that already in our collection. And I think we continue to work to collect those areas. I think one of the things around collecting is that most of these, it's usually word of mouth. I mean, someone tells you they have outfits, or sometimes it's through donations or gifts that happens. And so we continue to kind of look for ways to collect. And the fashion collection itself is extraordinary. I mean, I didn't even show images of some of the things in the collection, but it's truly amazing. We have dresses donated to the museum by B. Cole, for example. I mean, there are just a lot of material there. And I love that you brought up time periods, right? The turn of the century, because I think this is what it means to be a museum, is that it's not just about the current moment, right? What fashion is now. It's also about going back, right, to maintain the fashion that came before us, and which is why I highlighted not just Rosa Parks, but also the Civil War dress, right, which goes back even further, right? And so thinking about how do we have these kinds of objects, and then how do we care for them? I can tell you that they're actively still processing that collection, which represents all of the different periods that you mentioned, and that's what makes collections itself and collecting itself such an important thing, because it is so that when you go into our museum, we can, for example, rotate things out so you see new things. I mean, we can never physically have everything that we have in our collection up. Have any of you been to the museum before? It's a lot to get through, all right? Right? It's an incredible museum.
Spend a whole day there.
Yeah, but let's be very clear. And I love but there's a lot there, and so being able to rotate these things out to tell those stories. So that's a really great question. Yeah.
We have another question over here.
Thank you so much for everything that you presented. I wanted to ask you a question. When you talked about the way they made special accommodations for the visually impaired for the fashion show, I wanted to know if there was some type of historical thing that happened to a large segment of Black people that caused them to become visually impaired, and that's why they focused on making sure they were included.
See, that's a
fantastic question.
That is an amazing question. That is an amazing question. And this is what I'm going to say. When this collection becomes public, these are the kinds of questions that researchers and scholars will likely be asking, right?
Yes.
Right? I don't have the answer to that, but I am absolutely fascinated by that, right? Because it was every year, right, that they would host this fashion fair, right? And so, there's a story there. And even if the story is just to tell the story about how they were committed to creating fashion shows for the visually impaired within the Black community, but I think there's a story there. And that's the exciting part about this collection, is that it will create the space for folks to come and investigate further. There's a story about the Black advertising in there. People it is in, when you look at the memos and the business, they were amazing business folks. They were pushing at the edge of technology, right? Always moving with the flow of things. Even the ads for Pan Am Airways, right? Cigarette ads. Early on, it was white folks in the ads because they were building up the monetization of it, right? But you notice a gradual shift where if Bank of America wanted to do an ad, it had to be someone of color to feature in Ebony, right? These were some calculations that they made, and I share that to say that so much this archive will reveal things that have yet to be written, right?
Wow.
I think we have
There's another question right
here, and then we have two more.
We'll try to squeeze it in.
So you spoke about pushing boundaries and fluidity in fashion, and kind of how some of that was done in Black Dandism and in Met Gala and all of that. I was wondering if there was going to be opportunity in the new collection to really even think about sports and people like Dwayne Wade, and how they kind of began to push the boundaries of what males should wear. Like just the other day, there was a photo of A$AP Rocky with Mary Jane's on.
Yes.
Right. So I was just wondering if there's going to be a place in the exhibit about how sports figures are pushing those boundaries as well.
Yeah, no, that's also another great question. I know that my colleague Damian Thomas, who's a curator of sports, has been thinking about the fashion in sports quite a bit. And I do anticipate that work will happen. I don't know the timeline on that, but we're definitely on the pulse of it, for sure. Collecting is happening in that area, whether it's collecting by donation or collecting through purchases. I think it's happening, and I think it's an important thing to kind of point to, because I do think that when we think about the history of sports, I mean, it is true that a lot of these players, whether men or women or however they identify, are really challenging us to think about what it means to adorn and dress oneself, right? And I think that that's a really important thing to grapple with, because it forces museums, not just our museum but others, to figure out how do we then tell that story on display. Right, and I think it's really important. I mean, I even think about this in terms of some of the work that I'm doing around photography, of how do I collect photographs by contemporary, for example, photographers who are also challenging the medium of photography and what it can do, but also challenging the kinds of like representational images that we've come to see, right? I use this idea of politics of respectability before, and really what that means is really like there are ways in which what we wear, whether or not we cover our chests, for example, right? I mean, there's, right, and whether the cut is too low, all these different things that really bring certain kinds of opinions, right? Mm-hmm. But yet it is still part of a culture. It's still part of a people, right? How do you collect and document that, right? And so even with sports, I think about that with photography, and it's a work in. Collecting is always an ongoing process. Yeah.
Awesome. Yep. There's a question over here.
Oh, hello. How are you? My name is. I have two questions in one. So one was the NAACP in the 60s and 70s used to have fashion shows to protest about civil rights. And during this administration, so that's one, during this administration, how are we going to preserve what we have, being that they're trying to chop down everything? And how do we protect all of that?
Yes, I'm gonna answer that in a very tactful and diplomatic way.
Absolutely.
But and then also in an honest way, which is to say that there is no doubt that this current administration has made things more difficult for museums, universities, institutions across the board. What I can say is that since all of that, we have not removed anything from exhibition, and we have not stopped our collecting, and we have not stopped our commitment to the preservation of African American history. Full stop. And it is because of important people who support us, who make it possible to continue to do our work in spite of all that's happening. We are the Museum of African American History and Culture. The existence of our museum and the existence of that collection is because we've always worked against the currents of government, really, and of the kind of culture in which we live in, right? It has become more palpable, and so we're having to navigate that in different ways. But this question is obviously a common question now, and I want to linger with it a little bit, and just to say that, like, rest assured that we have the utmost care and commitment to the work that we do and to continue to preserve the history, because we need it now more than ever, right? And that's
Thank you, and thank you for that. We have a question over here.
Hi. Stephanie from the podium yesterday said joy is a form of resistance. With that in mind, I serve on have served on a number of museum boards and currently on a museum board. How can we at various museums collaborate so that these stories are coming out into where we are and not just where you are?
Yes, that is also a great question, and it is one of the things. So I'll answer that in two parts. The first part is that we have a number of programs where we take the museum out of DC, right? It is the National Museum, so that means it is for everyone even if they don't live in DC, but we also recognize that not everyone can get to DC. So we do things, for example, like community curation, where we go to different cities and we do pop-ups so that people can kind of experience the museum, but not in a way that if they had come. We created sort of the digital museum experience. There is an exhibition that is about to open called At the Vanguard. Write that down, At the Vanguard, and it is an exhibition of HBCUs in the US. And that exhibition is groundbreaking because it partnered with several different HBCUs around the US. And so the exhibition will open at our museum and it will travel to those other institutions, as an example, right? As another example, as I told you, I lead a team of film conservationists, preservationists, and as well as the Smith Center. They travel to different cities around the U.S. and they digitize people's home movies, right? So those home movies that you have down in your basement or under the floor or any of that material, those video cameras, we digitize it for you and we don't extract it, which is to say that we're not trying to collect it. We do that service and we give it back to you because we recognize the importance of being able to tell stories, right? So it's called the Home Movie Project, right? And so that's another way. And so we're always figuring out ways to activate, even for the Johnson Publishing Collection Archive, for example. That is an archive that is from and is part of the identity of Chicago. Right? And so you can imagine what it means for that archive to move, right? And so we have committed to also showing up into the city to activate that collection there because we know it's important. So I think your question is a really great question. I also think the subtext of your question is also, how do other museums also partner with communities, right, outside? So that didn't get lost, right? I got that. And I think that there still needs to be work done in that area of other museums, because I oftentimes think that many museums think about just their own institution, right? And forget the communities around them, right? They may have an exhibition here and there, but then they forget the communities around them. And so we're working towards that.
There's one more question towards the back.
We will take 2 more questions.
Hi, how you doing? My name is Arnold.
You're the photographer too.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Thank you for the great photo of us.
I figured it would be appropriate setting to.
I love questions from photographers.
Yeah.
So actually, this is a compliment. I'm super, super glad that you are in this position and that you are finding the archives that recreates our culture, that recreates our forefathers, and presenting it to us in this modern day. So I just want to congratulate you, and this presentation was excellent.
And we have one last question, or?
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
We have one last question, but you all are enjoying this, right? Yeah. So I think we can maybe take a few more if we have some questions, and also wanted to shout out our co-founder, Stephanie Rance, who is a fashionista as well.
Yes, we see.
All right, so we have 2 questions here, which
I can go first. Okay, I'll stand. Hello. Oh, thank you. Okay, thank you. I've been out.
Take it. Take the compliment. Take it all. Eat it up.
So I had a question. I mean, you spoke a little bit about this earlier regarding like the mission of preservation of Black history and heritage and what that meant to you. And I think a previous question touched on this as well, but I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how that mission perhaps has changed to accommodate this contemporaneous moment of like active erasure, and perhaps what part recruiting younger people in the act of preserving Black history, perhaps what that has to do with continuing that mission or protecting that mission going forward.
Yeah, that's a really great question. That's a really great question. And there are a few ways. So there's a few ways to talk about that. The way that I'm going to talk about that is to think about what it means to mentor, right? And to create kind of a pipeline, so to speak, right?
Yes, hired.
And yeah, so that was what I was going to say. So we have incredible paid internships that also provides housing in DC. And so we are one of the only museums in the Smithsonian that has fully paid internships, and we
Yes.
Amazing. That's almost unheard of.
That allows both a hybrid and a remote or in person. So that means that you can choose to go to DC, but if for any reason that's impossible, whether it's a caretaking of a family member or whatever, there's ways to do that work. And it's really important to say that we have an incredible team who run our internships, and we are very grateful to all of our donors who make that possible. It is people like you, whether it's members who give a small amount every year, or big donors who make it possible for us to do that work. So internships are completely paid. The other thing that's really important is that we also are creating entry-level positions for the museum, so that folks can, like, after they, for example, graduate from college, they can kind of figure their way out into that. And that's also important, because I think it's creating the space to go. But I also want to go even a little further with your question. 2 weeks ago, July has been an insanely busy travel month. So 2 weeks ago, I led a week long with colleagues between the Smithsonian and the Getty Institute in California, who, as I mentioned, we are co-stewards of the Johnson Publishing Archive. What that means is that they are digitizing the entire collection, and we will kind of ensure that it moves to the future, and we'll do a lot of the curatorial work. But we hosted a week-long HBCU conservation preservation workshop. What that meant is that we opened a pool of call, and we invited students, current students or recent grads of HBCUs to apply to learn the skills of what it means to preserve and conserve our objects and artifacts, in particular photography. We had every year, this was now the 5th year that we've done it. Every year, the application pool increases. And the number of applicants are extraordinary in terms of their interests. Some of them got BAs in chemistry and biology, others in film, others in history, sociology, African American studies, right? And they are all interested in learning how you conserve and preserve photographs. And so they spent a week in Chicago. We bring them out to Chicago. Again, we bring them to the city where the archive is from, not to LA or to DC, but in the city, blocks away from the former Johnson Publishing collection building, where they get to tour. We also show them the actual collection. They get to tour the facilities, and they learn about what it means when a photograph, and first of all, they see photographs from like the early 19th century, so daguerreotypes, cyanotypes, ambrotypes, sorry, I'm a nerd, okay, all right. Glass plates, right, all those things, and they learn what it means to repair those, right? So what we call stabilize. So say a daguerreotype needs to be digitized, but there's a crack and the daguerreotype. How do you then stabilize that, which is to say, how do you fix that so that then it can be photographed and then conserved, right? So they learned all of this. And so it's, to your question, one of the things that we hope that we're doing is introducing people to different kinds of career paths in these areas, right? And hopes that they may join these various institutions who have conservation teams, right? So maybe your goal isn't to be a curator, but maybe you are committed to the physical collection of ensuring that physical collection, like you see in here, these are all conservators and preservationists who make sure that, and I always tell them, I cannot do my job without them. Yeah. I cannot. So if I say, oh, I love this photograph of, James Van Der Zee, I want to put it on display. The conservator will say, well, you can't because the light levels are too high and this needs to be conserved, right? So just to give you an example, we're creating that kind of pipeline. And I'm lingering on that question a little bit because I actually think it is a foundational question of how do we as institutions, right, create the conditions to bring folks in, to teach them about these skills, right? Think about this film festival. There are not a lot of people who can project film, right? So if we think about traditional screenings, right, you need projectors, right? And so even that is a dying kind of profession. And so there are different ways to do that. I will stop. I'm happy to talk after this.
That's great.
I think this is your talent pipeline table over here. I'm just saying.
Seems like it.
I also had one more question about, you also mentioned at the Oak Bluffs and Ralph Lauren campaign. Specifically, I was kind of wondering about that. How far or how close do you think it's riding the line between appreciation and appropriation? Because, at the end of the day, who exactly are the proceeds going to? While they're partnering with HBCUs like Spelman, and, there is still some type of corporate interest when it comes to capturing the black dollar and, them wanting us to spend money there, know? So how close do you think
that's
that is?
a very layered.
That's a layered question. That's a layered question.
Let's give it up for Mama, though. Let's give it up for Mom. This is
Mom. Congrats. Brilliant kids.
I'm going to take a step, but I think you should also take a step because you're also in fashion. You have a really deep background in it. So here's how I'm going to approach that question. I tried to say this at the outset. Fashion and style is a very complicated endeavor. And I say that because it's connected to consumerism and consumption, right? I think it is. I mean, this is why you have things like the fast fashion movement or the kind of minimalist fashion movement or any capsule wardrobe, any of these things that you're trying to figure out how do you invest in a really good piece so that you don't have to go back and buy it again, right? But I say that to say that it's really hard, and that's why I ended with the idea that how we self-style ourselves and fashion ourselves, even though it's liberatory, it feels really great, and it should feel great that you can create your image. It's still it's not wholly liberatory in the sense that it's still connected to consumption and consumerism, and that there's someone who's making something money on that, right? And it's important to say that this is also why it's important to support black businesses, but because there is value always there. In relationship though to I think the heart of your question, which is Ralph Lauren, which we know is not a black-owned company, right? But also thinking about the people in which they've hired to do the work. So thinking about the kinds of strategies and choices that they are trying to make ever so slowly, right? So holding that in abeyance, or let me use a different word, holding that on the one hand, right? With on the other hand, that there's still a company that's going to get value from the release of this at this moment in time in relationship to what's happening on the Martha's Vineyard. That isn't to deny any of the folks who were behind that project, right? Because we should applaud them for that. Yes. Instead, it is to hold the corporation itself accountable to continue to sustain that work beyond August, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the fine line that we have to navigate, and that's with any entity. I mean, and so, And I added that photo there because I think it's relevant in terms of the conversation. It's not unlike the Met Gala conversation that we just had, right? And so thinking about the history of Ralph Lauren as the Americana, right? So also then thinking about how this collection also kind of pushes back against the historical images that we know and see and have had about something like Ralph Lauren, right? Right. So I'll pause there to see what my colleague has here, because I'm sure you have something else to add.
I do. And it's funny because Ralph Lauren has a special place in my heart because I worked at Ralph Lauren for about a decade as a stylist in the corporate offices in New York City. And the creative director and the art director for this specific project are like little brothers to me. So I applaud them because I've known them from 16, 20 years old and helped them along the way in their career paths. And so it is very nuanced because it's a beautiful collection. It's undeniable. It is gorgeous. But it still has those implications. You still have to ask those questions. Well, who are the people that are benefactors of this? Who are the people who are going to push this narrative forward and beyond August, like you said? It's a special project. I think that it's an ongoing project. It's ongoing work. So this is the start, but it's definitely not the finish. And if I know those gentlemen the way that I know those gentlemen, they're going to keep pushing those boundaries. They're going to keep doing the work. They're going to keep creating beautiful content. It may be under Ralph Lauren's umbrella. It might not. I don't know. I just say stay tuned to those two gentlemen and the creative team. Stay tuned. I really feel like this is a start to a bigger conversation.
And they will be here.
And they'll be here.
Yeah, they're here.
They will be here, and there will be some contributions made to the colleges, Spelman and Morehouse, and I'll let.
Yes.
I don't want to
That's
take over
good
your
to clarify.
conversation.
No,
I
it's
just
good to
wanna-
clarify.
To the young lady, Cole Brown, who directs the documentary on Oak Bluffs, they're showing it at the festival. James Jester is a Morehouse grad, and he's the one who talked Ralph Lauren into making that fabulous line. They will be here, and you can ask them these questions, but portions of the proceeds are going to support HBCUs 1,000%. I wouldn't have them here if it wasn't. Okay.
And I
Thank
also
you for
want to
clarifying that.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's really great. And also should add that they consulted a lot of different institutions and folks, including our museum, in terms of the collective. So just thinking about like what it means for people to find a moment to do the work within these institutions and to do it with care, right? And what that looks like, right? This sounds like an example of that, right? Making a small space, right? To make do, to do something. But again, how do you appreciate and still have the questions, right? I think that's what we're supposed to do, right? I think filmmakers will tell you that if there's no critiques of the work, then maybe the work didn't land, right? I think we have to, when we engage work, that's what it is, yeah.
Great question, though. Thank you so much. Yes. Do we have any more, any additional questions?
Testing. Okay, there we go. All right. Did you all enjoy that? It was so wonderful, so wonderful. Thank you so much, LeCharles. Thank you, Donnell. Such a pleasure, such a great conversation, and all the beautiful fashion that we have here in the lounge. Give it up for yourselves.
We see you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Round of applause.
So I imagine there are a couple more questions. Will you stick around for a little bit and answer questions of folks? Very good. Well, let's give it up again for LeCharles and Donnell. Thank you so much.